It was 81 when we were here, right?
Yes.
So how does it feel to come back where you really started making your first big, you were doing dices and you were doing bows at the time, I remember.
Big bows. This
Yes.
is not that far from a bow.
It's not so far. It's not
Now that
so
you
far.
mention it, yeah,
Yes.
It's kind of like,
Yeah, even that.
yeah.
Even that, yes.
So, how does it feel? It feels good. I'm glad you're here because you were the original neighbor, and it was like the weirdest TV show because you were there living in a pretty bare, raw space. And I remember you had a stove and a sink, maybe, and maybe not a sink. You had a hose.
No, I didn't have sink. It was no electricity, no water, no bathroom, and the telephone was in a trash plastic bag.
Because of the dust.
And we had like cardboard on the floor because you remember the floor. We didn't know.
I'm intrigued by the way you're working at the moment, finding those maquettes and working up to these big tableaux. And I'm often intrigued in your work by the sense of scale. I'm looking at this painting here, for instance, and it's evoking a sense of big scale mountains, sky. At the same time, it's a sort of micro scale, leaves, plants, and I'm wondering also about light. It's very effulgent. It's kind of full of a spontaneous kind of light within itself. How much do you think about the scale of association when you're working on this kind of scale?
It's a good question because I think scale is a really important part of what I'm doing now because of starting small and getting bigger with the image that might work small, but something else happens when it gets big. In this particular case, this painting came before I started working like this. This is a very spontaneous kind of scumbling my way into a shape, and there is a kind of buoyancy, or like you said, there's kind of a liveliness to it. And that relate to the bigger shapes in the newer work. So I think I was grasping for a bigger shape because as a painter you can paint and paint into things and they get smaller and smaller and it can get very exciting, but to hold on to a shape and to think that a form has enough substance that it could hold a canvas.
Do you feel more comfortable painting like with people being able to see, or do you prefer like your own personal space for painting?
I prefer to be alone in my own personal space, but this is an experiment for myself to see how I can, push the boundaries of my comfortable area and also to have conversations with people that wouldn't usually be in my studio. Okay, that was great.
All right, let me ask you a question. I'm looking at the smaller works and I'm saying, wow, this is collage.
Yes.
And at what point did you start using collage? I mean, I never thought of you as a collagist or artist and so how does that play into your work? That would be my question right off the bat.
Okay, collage started to be part of my maquette developing procedures in public work. I made very, very large paintings that I had to present to committees, and I would make these little collages of what I would paint, very large. And I just finished 4 very large paintings, and so the facility of how easy it was to move things around and be creative and playful on a way that I couldn't on a large painting made me want to try it for my studio work. And this is fairly recent.
Hi, I'm John Chach, and I'd like to ask, what ghosts have you felt in this experience?
Interesting. Ghosts, that's very interesting. There's a lot. Jean-Michel Basquiat, who's right down the street, Keith Haring, Robert Mapplethorpe, Those are the famous ones.
Well,
Now, some of the other ones. Arch Connolly, who actually had a show in the space just recently. We did a retrospective of his work here. Peter Hujar. That's enough.
How important is it to you that people are able to see your paintings from a faraway distance?
If you walk away from something big, it congeals into much more subtle nuances of relationships. When you come up close, it's more about the brushstrokes and the actual physicality of the paint. So I think both are important. So yes, this is an ideal space because you can walk away from that. So Nick, what are you doing?
I'm stretching the canvas
Why?
so we can re-stretch it and make another painting.
2 more paintings before the show's over. Is that what we're going for? Can you show us what was on the canvas you're unstretching? Actually, that wasn't a show here last year at the Christmas show. Okay, here we go.
Hi, I'm Christine. I just came to your gallery and I really love your show. A question, you've been doing this for the past 30 years. Were you part of the graffiti movement at all?
There was graffiti going on. When I first started here, Keith Haring was tagging on the streets, and Jean-Michel Basquiat was working in the neighborhood, and Fab Five Freddy, and the rapping was happening down the street. So I enjoyed it. It was part of it like that. But in terms of my work came more from like pre-Columbian and non-Western art. As a student, I traveled a lot to Mexico, and I looked at a lot of kind of Mayan-inspired and Mayan art. And also Frida Kahlo, things like that.
She's my favorite.
Yeah.
She's my favorite.
As someone who's admired your color and your interesting use of strange textures over the decades, I'm curious what your relationship is to these vibrant colors and what happened to the coffee and stuff that you at one point were mixing into your paint.
I'd like to know, not knowing your work very personally, but having seen it change through the years, I'd like to find out how your work has changed and has become more abstract, in a sense, from what it used to be, and how it did stay the same in a way by using colorful images.
I think the change is not so much. I mean, even when I used imagery such as nature-based imagery, I was dealing with the forms of nature in an abstract way. So if there was a flower next to a seashell, the seashell was not necessarily the same proportions as the flower would be in nature. I used the shape in a different way, in an abstract way. So in a way, there's still shapes that are relating to each other. There's these little kind of dramas going on between these bulbous shapes that are in this work. And maybe, 10 years ago, this might have been a seashell with some tomatoes, but now it's just a shape. And I think you're right. The color is consistent, but it's stronger. I mean, there's something in this group of work, I think there is a very central image that is presented, and it's not behind veils, which I've been doing for a long time. It's much more in your face. It's very graphic. It's very simple, but I think it makes it stronger.
Do you have a favorite painting here, and why?
My favorite is this. It's called Tablet, and it's my favorite because there are all the things that I love about painting, and it's like a new painting of mine, but it's very much like an old painting of mine. I see things in it that I would have enjoyed as a child, but I still enjoy as a grown man. So this is it.
Well, in Spanish, I think I can tell it better. Me gustan las pinturas de Roberto Juarez porque es inquietante el color, las formas. Me gustan las escalas con las que trabaja en estos grandes formatos. Y tiene, no sé, alegría, movimiento. Me gusta, es interesante.
Gracias.
You can think about new ways of applying these shapes to the canvas.
Instead of just drawing them freehand.
Because everything now looks handmade.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you're, for the first time since I've known you, you're using very clean edges. Which
could be
is a
cleaner.
nice, and it could be even cleaner. And then if the edges are going to be cleaner, the surface of the paint could change.
Mm-hmm.
So that I don't feel like I'm looking at, if I'm looking at that solid blue shape,
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like it's a more opaque version of what's transparent underneath. I don't have a sense of this. I guess what I'm looking for is a real physicality to the shape.
I agree. I think.
And I think you do that in the collages because
to go a little deeper in your description of the brush stroke that breaks the elements of the painting.
Okay.
You understand?
Yes. For instance, this is a patch of camel color paint. I should go like this, right? And the brush strokes make this shape that looks kind of like a horn that gets repeated here in a more straight line or a more hard edge. And you could go back and clean this up and make it hard edge, but the softness of the wet paint into the wet paint has a certain energy to it, has a certain force that says, I want to be this. And that is important to me. So there's a kind of emotional component to how the shapes are created.
Okay. For me personally, if I'm doing something, I technically like how the color orange looks and how it's used. What color do you best like using that's smooth, or you like the rigidness of it?
All right. I think I like more the idea of contrast, those ideas of texture, smooth or texture or rough. How one looks next to each other, that's the most exciting thing to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is so beautiful and powerful, this painting, and it's got a lot of figurative qualities to it that are implied. The clouds and the wheel or the clock in the trees and I love this painting so much, and it has a sense of a road race. But I'm supposed to...
You're on.
Okay. So you talk about when you first started at La Mama that you were indoctrinated to be one of the first artists in here before the gallery started so that you could create an energy and kick off what would become a long run as a gallery. And the photograph of you on this wall in front of a painting that you made, at that time I was telling you that this painting is reminiscent of that painting so many years ago. I wonder when you work in different environments, or when you've been working in La Mama, where a lot of your career began, if you feel the energy, and if that changes the way that you paint, or how you feel when you work, and if it makes different results when you work.
Okay. I think in terms of energy in this space, now it's very different than when it was 31 years ago. But now there's a lot of ghosts. There's a lot of residue of experiences and history in this place. It's a great place for me. It's where I started my professional life as a painter. And 30 years later, I know that a lot of people are not around anymore. A lot of great artists, a lot of great dealers, a lot of great writers, a lot of great actors. They're gone for many reasons. La Mama, the woman who was so generous to let me paint here, is gone. So part of that is understanding that and kind of processing, for me, is very valuable as an artist. And to work here again is also kind of, what is the word? Not sweet, but innocence. There's an innocence about coming back to the place you started. And it makes you understand what's basic, what's true, what's good about what I do as a painter. And Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a positive feeling. There's not so much nostalgia, which is part of it. People say, well, it's changed so much. Don't you wish it was like it was? No, I don't wish it was like it was. It was then, and now is now. And it's a very positive time in my life and my work. So it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. So I was interested to know of your idea, your urge to blow things up to a gigantic size. What the satisfaction is in that, or have some of the frustrations, but does it change the thing completely? That sort of thing.
Or my impulse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And you have to help. I like big because I like architecture. I think I have a romance with architecture for my whole life. I think it comes from growing up in Chicago where there are great buildings. And the idea that architecture and painting could be together is not something I'm making up. It's historic. I mean, in Mexican art and in Roman art and Pompeii. But that idea that building and painting together is the most wonderful thing to me that could happen, you know, because I love both those things.
The paintings that I'm standing in front of are like other of the paintings in this exhibition, which is very beautiful and very much unlike. I think it's a new step in your work because I find a lot of both biomorphic but mainly constructed forms in your paintings here. But I am particularly interested in the art of collage from a historical point of view, from its beginnings in about 1905 or 1906, and as it developed through artists that were interested in Dada, like Kurt Schwitters, and then later, particularly people like Robert Motherwell and Esteban Vicente, whose use of collage is extremely interesting. I am looking at these collages and would particularly like to know how you make the leap from collage to painting, and do you consider the collaged preparatory studies for these paintings works of art, standalone works of art, or works of art themselves?
I think, by example, I'll just show you one of the collages. And the leap from this constructed collage from advertisement from Art Forum is done very kind of in the historic way of gridding. We make a grid. My assistant, Nick Morgan, makes a grid on my collage, and we number it, and then we grid the larger one. Usually they're a lot larger than this. And then it's a drawing project, basically following where it lays, and the proportions of this become that. And how big that becomes is an interesting part of the art making. For me, right now, this is an interesting painting, but I would imagine it as large as this square. If you could back up and just see this, a square this large, I think would be another kind of work, and that is very interesting to me. I feel like I'm beginning a new body of work. And as a work of art, I think, yes, collages are works of art. To me, this thing has a certain kind of life because of the cuts and the use of it as something to be used. I like that part of it, and I think that makes it very art-like.
Yeah.